Hi guys, welcome back to yet another fun DIY sailboat refit video here aboard good old Athena. It's finally here. This is Athena's new freezer that I've been waiting for a little over 2 months. This is the Isotherm BI53, and this week's first challenge is going to be how to get this thing aboard the boat. I am definitely going to have to unpack this to get it through the companionway hatch. Like a glove. So this is the Isotherm BI53. It looks like there's a date back here. It says the 29th of June last year. Why it took them 2 months to get this thing to me, I have no idea. 2 openings, a little basket, an internal light, and a volume of 53 liters. This thing is primarily designed to be a freezer. There's also the BI75, which is a fridge that has an internal volume of 75 liters, but the external dimensions are identical on the 2 products, leading me to think that the BI53 is a little bit better insulated than the BI75. The freezer is available with 3 different options when it comes to the compressor. The one I've got here is the entry-level model, the cheapest one. The compressor on this version is air-cooled. On the 2 much more expensive models, it's saltwater cooled. Some will argue that those 2 water-cooled options are more suited for cruising in warmer climates, and they may very well be right, but those options were also roughly double the price. And here aboard Athena, we're going to have tons of battery capacity, plus 1,000 watts of solar, plus a diesel generator, plus a high output alternator on the main engine. So we don't necessarily have to care that much about efficiency. I'm confident that this will keep the temperature below freezing inside of it, no matter how warm it is outside. If I wanted a better, more efficient solution than this, I would be much more likely to go with a cool blue setup like the one I used here in the fridge in the galley, rather than one of those 2 water-cooled options. The reason I went with the BI53 is a matter of time. I have a giant to-do list I want to get checked off before Ava gets here in roughly 98 days. So yeah, rather than waste a week or 2 building my own freezer box, which would probably be spiffier than this one, I decided just to fork up the money and buy the BI53. Speaking of the never-ending to-do list, besides installing the freezer aboard Athena this week, I also want to get my other boat, Obelix, the 30-foot sailboat I've been living aboard for the last 6 years, ready for sail. Last week I put Obelix up on the hard, I scraped the bottom, polished the top sides, applied fresh bottom paint, and she started looking pretty dang spiffy. This week I've started fitting the new cockpit locker hatches that I made a few weeks back, and well, I've also picked up the spray hood from the dry cleaner. Old, crusty, rusty, rotten hatches, and new, non-rotten ones. I'll let the future owner decide if he or she wants to keep this light gray color or paint them a different color. Circling back to the spray hood or dodger, if you guys recall from a few weeks back, this was awfully green, and now it's white and pristine. I may have been a little quick in calling this pristine. Some of the stitching just came apart here. Yeah, I think I'll leave this off and let the future owner decide if this is worth salvaging or not. Inside of the boat, I've replaced these 2 old batteries. I did that not because they don't hold a charge, because they do, but the engine was kind of slow to start, and I figured that was because of the old batteries, because these are from '09. Let's see if the engine is better at starting with the new batteries. Just like that. The engine is the original Volvo Penta MD6A from 1973, so it's almost 50 years old, and it starts just like that. It's supposed to rain tomorrow, so if I can get this sealing strip installed, that'll be a great test to see if the hatches are leak-free. They feel like a nice snug fit, but I guess only time will tell. For the Alban Ballards, it's notoriously difficult to find these latches in the right size. The previous owner replaced this one back here. I blindly copied the old hatch, but unfortunately we now have a situation where the forward one here fits nice snug, but this one back here, it can't close. I'll leave this little conundrum for the next owner. I'll make him or her aware of it. And well, the options are basically to move this up a little bit or to find a latch that's a better fit than this one. Old hatches, new hatches. I think that's a big improvement. I never completely finished this little slidey thing here. It's all done, painted and varnished. It's just not glued in place. I better do that before I sell the boat. I spent a few more hours fixing stuff aboard Obelix last night, and as my very last action of the day, I popped some of the running rigging into the washing machine and then into the dryer. It was kind of green and also very stiff, and now it's clean and super nice and soft. On a side note, while the dryer was running, I kept an eye on the humidity and it never really went up. So yeah, even though the dryer is not vented, it works great. Right here next to the washer and the dryer is where the freezer is gonna go, more specifically down here. I better start by clearing my tool storage area, which apparently also has turned into one lost sock storage area. Poor Ava's probably having a heart attack right about now. Okay, so I need some kind of shelf down here with a cutout that'll allow room for the compressor. I have just noticed a small challenge, and that's the fact that there's condensation down here. The way I'm planning on building this is to have the shelf and then tab a bit of support to the hull that supports the underside of that shelf. But yeah, the condensation might be a little bit of a challenge. Epoxy doesn't like the presence of moisture or water when it's trying to cure. That can lead to some less than desirable side effects. So I might have to hold off on putting the support in place, but I can still build the shelf. And it looks like I need to place that around 47 centimeters below the countertop. I've made myself a couple of little spacers just to make absolutely sure that the shelf here and the countertop are going to be parallel. I've applied a little bit of thickened epoxy to this. Now just a couple of screws and it's going to be strong as an ox. I'll repeat the process over here on the forward side. I'm in a little bit of a plywood crisis, meaning I don't really have enough of the stuff. So this piece of scrap is all I had for the shelf. My horrible plywood shortage means that this is not going to be deep enough to be tabbed to the hull the entire way, but that's okay. We'll figure something out. I've placed some little marks here on the plywood to match the curvature of the hull, and it looks like somewhere right around here is where I'm going to be able to glass this to the hull. The rest here is going to be open. Let's see if this thing fits. Nice. The shelf is made out of 18mm plywood and it feels pretty sturdy. But let's see what happens when we cut out some of that plywood to make room for the compressor. I just realized something. The compressor is mounted here underneath the freezer, but it is removable. So if I mount this underneath the shelf instead of underneath the freezer, then I don't have to remove a chunk of the shelf, which means I'll preserve that strength. This wasn't mentioned in any of the sales material or in the manual, but there's this nice little doohickey back here where you can attach a bit of ducting to. The heat exchanger that's hiding in there is also a little bit beefier than I thought it was going to be, which is certainly a nice surprise. And I came across something interesting in the manual. They have these classifications here for what ambient temperature range the product is designed to be used in. There's SN, N, ST, and T. If you look inside of the freezer, there's a little sticker that says ST, meaning it's subtropical class. That means it's rated from 18 degrees Celsius to 38 degrees Celsius. If it's more than 38 degrees Celsius for a prolonged period of time here inside of the boat, well then I think it's safe to say that the freezer, Ava, and I are just going to start heading north because that is way too hot. I think I've got a good plan. I've marked out the position of the compressor. Of course, it's going to sit here underneath the shelf. I want to use some bolts to through-bolt it to the shelf rather than relying on screws like they are on the freezer. And yeah, I think it's gonna work out. Good morning, guys. I started out today by drilling 4 holes to secure the compressor. I've made absolutely sure that the fasteners are not gonna be proud of the surface. I think the next step is gonna be to cut a little cutout to make sure that I've got room for the wire and that little bit of tubing that goes from the compressor to the box. That's this bit of stuff right here. A tiny little cutout in the front of the shelf should be enough. I picked up a little bit of ventilation ducting, but I kind of want to get the freezer installed first so I can see where I can actually route this stuff to. The nicely insulated but fragile tubing is secured by a single screw back there and also a doohickey right there. So if we remove those, then I should be able to loosen the compressor and mount that under the shelf. This is not going to be fun to do alone. This is one of those instances where it would have been really nice to have someone here with me. There's a single screw back here holding the box for the compressor in place, and I've put a spirit level under the back of the box to not squish the tubing. So far, so good. I've got the compressor sitting down here. Now I can relax for a second. Also got the fasteners in place. Now it is just a matter of getting the compressor mounted underneath here with the fasteners. It's going to be fiddly because they're going to be kind of difficult to get to in there, but let's give it a go. I've noticed that there are 2 holes on the forward side and 2 open holes on the aft side. So I think I've got a plan. I've put the washer and the nut on the 2 aft fasteners here, so hopefully I can slide them out in there and then worry about the forward ones. Oh, this is indeed a fiddly process. That was a prime example of fiddly boat stuff that just takes forever, but at least the compressor is nice and secure. I've only got a single nut on here now, and I don't want this to come vibrating loose, so I'm just going to add a second one, and this is even a nylock nut. The reason why I didn't put the nylock nut on first is because those can be a little bit difficult to get started, and in this cramped situation, that's not what I need. And this is what the freezer looks like in its spot. I think this is going to work out really well. Having looked at the freezer I've got here, having read the manual and having looked at a lot of different materials online, there's a ton of different conflicting information, and what's in the manual doesn't really reflect what I've got here. So before I go any further, it might be a good idea just to get the freezer fired up to see how loud it is, if we can actually sleep in here with it running. Because the information I found online, it was around 23, 24 decibels, which would be perfectly fine. But yeah, let's just test that to make sure. I really, really hope this is not going to be hellishly loud, because we don't really have anywhere else on the boat to put the freezer. But if something is going to be loud, it's probably going to be the fan. I can hear that the compressor is running, the fan is turning, and the light here inside of the freezer came on. But I wouldn't say that's too loud. I can see that there's frost forming here on this stainless, so let's close the freezer and see what it sounds like when it comes down to temperature. If I get really close to the compressor, the mic is probably going to be able to pick up the sound. And then if I stop the fan, that's pretty quiet. It's been 15-20 minutes, something like that, and it's official. Athena now has a freezer. Now that the freezer has come down to temperature, of course the compressor has stopped, the fan has stopped, and it is completely silent in here. I might swap out the fan to something a little bit more quiet, just like I did with the fan heaters in last week's video. I have 2 pieces of conduit that runs from the distribution panel here to the area underneath the freezer. I hooked up a vacuum, pulled a line through there, so now it is time to pull some cables. Ooh, there's quite a bit of weight here. The thick cable is for the windlass, the thin one here is for the freezer, and then there is another thin one for, well, other DC stuff. I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull the cable for the windlass through the conduit, because there is kind of a sharp bend to the conduit, but yeah, we might as well just give it a try. If I can't, I can always run this underneath the cabin sole at a later date. I've staggered the cables a little bit to give myself a fighting chance, so yeah, let's just give this a go. That windlass cable is quite the chunky monkey, but it feels like I am making progress. Ta-da! That is awesome. I really should start labeling the wiring in here just to make future me a little bit happier. Sir, and print. Progress is being made. I have sorted out all of the cables, and I've also gone through the terrifying ordeal of cutting the hole in the countertop. It was, of course, only terrifying because of my plywood shortage, but thankfully it worked out. I also swung by the workshop and picked up some plywood to cover up the front of this thing. And of course there's going to be an opening here for the storage in behind here, and some kind of venty thingy here for the compressor. The plywood is nice and square. Every corner is cut to 90 degrees, but look at that. Down there, no gap. Up here, humongous gap. I knew something like this was going to happen, so I oversized the piece of plywood. So let's see if we can't whittle this down into something we can actually use. Most of the joints are going to get covered up by trim, so this doesn't have to be super precise. Now I've got a piece of plywood that fits, or at least most of it. It doesn't fit over here. The thing is, this piece of plywood here is not only at an angle, it's also wavy. So to be able to get this to fit, I kind of have to cut the hole. It's going to be here for the storage axis, and then use that to trace the curvature of this wonky piece of plywood onto this piece of plywood. These are not the final holes. Those are going to be a little bit bigger, but these are big enough that I can get in there. This should be a pretty good fit, but remember, any gaps are going to get covered up by trim, so it doesn't really matter. That looks like a pretty spiffy freezer area, if I do say so myself. Of course, the vent hole in the final version is going to be a lot bigger, but I just wanted to put a small hole there because I'm going to do a little overnight test. The overnight test is to see if the sound level is indeed acceptable, but well, really it's more of an excuse to get ice cream. But yeah, I haven't had a freezer for 6 years, so I think I've earned myself some ice cream. Good morning, guys. I am happy to report the overnight test was absolutely delicious. I mean, successful. The noise from the freezer didn't keep me from falling asleep, and it didn't wake me up during the night. In fact, I hardly even noticed it. I'll consider that a proof of concept for this setup. I know some of you guys were a little concerned about the noise considering the close proximity to the V-berth, but I think it's gonna be fine. So next week I can go ahead and do the final assembly of all of this and also figure out the trim to cover up these exposed edges of plywood. For the fun of it, I left my little temperature and humidity logger inside of the freezer overnight, and it looks like the compressor comes on for about 15 minutes every hour and a half. To be honest, I would rather have built my own freezer box, but like I said in the beginning of the video, time is short, so now we're stuck with the BI53, which I'm sure is going to be perfectly fine. Now, there are a couple of things I want to fix aboard Obelix before Tuesday, because that's when the potential next owner of Obelix is swinging by to check out the interior. One of the many good things about the Albin Ballad is that it is super easy to remove the diesel tank. It's only about 40 liters. It's sitting here in the bottom of the cockpit locker. I've already removed all of the connections, so it should just lift right out. Why do I want to remove the diesel tank? Well, to clean it. And why do I want to clean it? Because I'm pretty sure there's some nasty stuff inside of it. On occasions, when I refueled late at night to keep warm inside of the boat, I forgot to put the deck fill back on, and I'm pretty sure a little bit of rain got into the tank, which means there's water in there, and when there's water in a diesel tank, well, then you get a diesel bug, diesel plague, diesel pest, call it whatever you want. You get nasty stuff in your tank. And that is the entirety of the diesel tank removal procedure. When I purchased Obelix and was sailing her home, the engine stopped a couple of times because of diesel plague or whatever you want to call it. And I'd much prefer it if the next owner of Obelix don't go through that same experience. Whew, it started pouring down outside, so I had to put the good camera away. There was a little bit of gunk inside of the tank, not as bad as I'd feared, but there was a little bit. Now, because there isn't an access hatch into the tank, I can't really get in there to scrub it or anything like that. So the way I got the gunk out was just by dumping a bunch of alcohol in there, swirling it around, dumping it out, and then repeating that process until the alcohol that came out was clear and gunkless. I used alcohol rather than soapy water or anything like that, because if there are a few drops of the alcohol left in the tank, it doesn't really matter, because that's just going to get dissolved into the diesel when I pour new, fresh, deliciously clean diesel into the tank. I'm going to hold off on reinstalling the diesel tank until it stops pouring down outside, because it's a little bit yucky. But in rain-related news, I'm happy to report that the hatch here in the quarter berth is leak-free. I haven't checked the two other ones, but I'm sure they're fine. So yeah, that's awesome. I'll leave the diesel tank here in the cockpit for now, and then I'll come back when it's not raining and reinstall it, and also just give the deck a quick clean. And that's it. It's been a lot of work, but once the deck is cleaned, I'll feel good about selling Obelix in her current condition. I mean, she is still an old boat, so I'm sure the next owner is gonna find stuff he or she wants to fix, but at least I've made an effort. So next week, I should be able to start focusing 100% on Athena again, which will be nice. So next week, I'll do the final assembly of the freezer area, figure out the trim in there. I should also be able to get started on the little area for the lithium batteries in the aft cabin. And next week, I should also measure for and order the tracks for the head sail and for the staysail. And that just about wraps up this week's video. I hope to see all of you guys back here aboard Athena next week for yet more DIY fun. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like. See you!